Once again, they say they haven't been receiving money they had been promised. Now they're putting pressure on the state attorney general to take action. Lily Jamali is a contributor for KQED's The California Report. She's been investigating the story and joins us now to talk about her findings. First, we're talking about the PG&E Fire Victims Trust. For those who aren't familiar, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, this Fire Victim Trust was set up last year as part of this bankruptcy settlement between PG&E and about 70,000 fire survivors. So these are people who lost their homes, their businesses, and in some cases lost their loved ones in fires that PG&E caused between 2015 and 2018. And the whole point of this trust was really to distribute the billions of dollars that were set aside as part of that settlement.
And what did your investigation find? Where is all the money going?
Yeah, well, this money is, what we found in our investigation was that in its first year, this Fire Victim Trust spent about $51 million on overhead fees and expenses. So when you actually break it out, you can get a much more detailed picture. You can see that $150,000 a month is going to the trustee at the very top. The top claims administrator is making about $1,250 an hour. And then you have a host of Wall Street financial advisors and law firms that are also making millions off of this trust. What we were able to do also was to uncover an additional $12.5 million that was not reported, that was spent in 2020, but was not included in its annual report.
And how did you come up with those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually a little bit of a scavenger hunt, to be honest with you. We started by looking at the annual report that the trust had submitted to the bankruptcy court a couple of weeks ago. And we thought, we would be doing a very simple just analysis of what was in there and filing a story and moving on. But what we found was a very vague breakdown of where all these millions of dollars went. And you have to remember that every dollar that's spent on overhead is a dollar that is not spent on compensating a fire survivor. So people are really carefully watching all the activity around this trust and the spending that's happening. So we were able to look not just at that annual report, which breaks things down in broad categories, but we also looked at filings to the bankruptcy court docket, transcripts from hearings in the bankruptcy court last year, as well as correspondence from the Fire Victim Trust itself. I mean, we have been following this case very closely, and so we knew that the trust, even though it was formally created on July 1st of last year, was actually up and running for the first 6 months of last year as well. So we were able to piece all of that together and, as best as we could, try to give a much more clearer picture of where all these millions of dollars are going.
And speaking of that money, how much money have families received so far?
Yeah, well, so in the first year, the Fire Victim Trust, as it was just getting started, distributed about $7 million to fire survivors. We have seen the pace of payments pick up quite a bit since then. So as we sit here and talk today, the Fire Victim Trust has distributed about $286 million to fire survivors. When you think of the total pool of money that was promised, fire victims were told it would be about $13.5 billion. So $286 million is a tiny fraction of that. And we've also been looking at, how many fire survivors have actually had their claims fully paid and processed, I should say fully processed and started to get any payments from this trust. And that number is about 927 families right now, out of 70,000. So that's about 1%, a little bit more than 1% of the total group of fire survivors. It's not a lot, and one of the concerns is that if they are one of the lucky few, they're only getting 30% of their claim right now. That's partly a structure of the way that this trust was set up in the first place. It was funded partly with cash, but partly with PG&E stock. And so, the concern there is that you have to liquidate that stock, turn it into cash to put that money into the hands of the people who need it, many of whom are living in trailers right now in, the North Bay and in places like Butte County. So you have to liquidate all of it. That can take time. And so for right now, folks are getting 30%. And there is a hope that, in the coming weeks and months, that percentage will grow. But it's really not enough to rebuild a house when you're seeing cost of rebuilding skyrocketing, building materials are getting really expensive. So it really puts victims in a tough spot.
Yeah, small percentage on the scale of things. Tell us about the letter lawmakers sent to the Attorney General.
Yeah, this is a group of a bipartisan group of about a dozen state lawmakers. After our report came out, they approached Attorney General Rob Bonta to say, look, you need to review the expenses of this trust. You need to review the administration of this trust. And so far, we haven't, gotten any indication from the Attorney General as to whether he's planning to pick that up and run with it. We shall see. I think there's a lot of interest in getting more transparency and more accountability. Fire survivors certainly want that. I had the chance to meet with about 100 of them, actually. About 3 weeks ago, they held a rally in Paradise because they really want to make sure their voices are heard. In a process like this, you're dealing with so many fire survivors. It is going to take time. You do want to make sure you're paying people who really need it and not, for example, fraudulent claims. So there is going to be a little bit of a runway required. But I think a lot of people are looking at this a year and a half in and saying, why is this taking as long as it is?
And you certainly are giving them a voice as well. Lily Jamali with KQED, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In a statement, PG&E said, quote, "We continue to honor the victims of the Camp Fire and previous fires and all that was lost by continuing to the important work to reduce wildfire and other risks across our energy systems." PG&E goes on to say, "We funded the trust in accordance with our plan of reorganization. PG&E is not involved in distributing trust funds. That process is led by a court-appointed trustee and claim administrator." We also reached out to the Fire Victim Trust for a statement and have not heard back yet.